His name is Darnell Brooks. Yesterday, Sunday, November 28th, CNN ran a tweet that a memorial service was being held for people killed in a Christmas parade after a car ran into the parade. There was more discussion yesterday of the January 6th events on Capitol Hill than of Darrell Brooks. I said Darnell, I'm sorry, Darrell Brooks. Darrell Brooks Jr. is being held on $5 million bail in Wisconsin after Brooks drove his Ford Escape into people participating in a Christmas parade. Not a holiday parade, as most members of the media have said. NPR in particular covered it as a holiday parade. It was explicitly in Waukesha, Wisconsin, a Christmas parade, and Darrell Brooks drove his SUV into the parade attendees, killing 6 and injuring more than 40. 6 people. A child, included among them, died. It is awful, awful stuff. Made more awful by the media refusing to cover it. I have rarely seen a story memory hold so quickly. The ages of the victims were from a child all the way up to age 81. Darrell Brooks had a rap sheet that included weapons offenses, assault and battery, drugs, bail jumping, and statutory rape. He had repeatedly been let out of jail. In fact, he had jumped bail and then was given a light bond. He should have been in prison. He was leaving a domestic disturbance. The media repeatedly, over the few days after Darrell Brooks ran his car into the crowd, said he had actually been fleeing the scene of a crime and took a wrong turn. The New York Times buried the story on page A22. They excused themselves, and then they corrected the record. Oh, by the way, it turns out that guy actually wasn't fleeing the scene of a crime. Next story. They ran past this story as quick as they could and moved on to other things. It came 2 days after Kyle Rittenhouse was declared not guilty by a jury in Kenosha, Wisconsin. According to Court Commissioner Kevin Costello, who granted the $5 million bail, I want to read you this. Did this get any airtime outside of Fox News? The answer, no, it did not. Here is his quote. I have no problem with the bail being recommended by the state. The nature of this offense is shocking. 2 detectives not only tried to stop this, but rendered an opinion this was an intentional act. According to Fox News, detectives who witnessed the Sunday incident, in which a red Ford SUV allegedly driven by Brooks plowed through a barricade and then dozens of protesters, said it looked like an intentional act according to court documents. Let me read you a little more here. Darrell Brooks' violent past stretches back to 1999. He was accused and convicted of aggravated battery with intent to cause great bodily harm. More recently, he ran a woman over and punched her in the face on November 2nd. He has an outstanding warrant in Nevada for skipping bail on a sex crime charge. His criminal record extends down to Georgia. Waukesha District Attorney Susan Oper told Fox News Digital Monday evening her office planned on seeking bail so high Brooks would not have a chance of posting it. The incident comes just weeks after prosecutors in Milwaukee recommended he be allowed to walk on just $1,000 despite a 50-page rap sheet and an outstanding warrant for bail jumping on a sex crime charge in Nevada. The Milwaukee District Attorney has finally launched an internal investigation to figure out how Darrell Brooks could get off with a $1,000 bond after bail jumping a sex crime warrant in Nevada. The problem here, in addition to what Brooks did, is that outside of Fox News, a major American media outlets have chosen not to cover this. To the extent they have been forced to cover it, they have covered it in the passive voice about a Ford Escape SUV running into a crowd at a Christmas parade or holiday parade. It's as if planes flew into the World Trade Center on September 11th, 2001. Autonomous, thinking, self-flying planes flew into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001, and a Ford Escape, an autonomous vehicle, itself drove itself into a crowd. This is why we can't have nice things. The American media intends to pursue narratives. I have friends who say rightly that we should stop saying the American media. The American media is composed of individuals, and those individuals are unique, and those individuals take different tactics. Those individuals take different views. Those individuals have different positions. We should not say the American media. Except the media does it to the rest of us. The media talks about white voters. The media talks about black voters. The media talks about the college-educated voter. The media talks about the non-college-educated voter. The media talks about Republicans. The media talks about Democrats. But you're not allowed to talk about the media. No. You must name the individual reporters. I don't know who the individual reporter was at CNN who tweeted out that the car drove itself into the crowd. But I do know that the editors and managers at CNN let it slide. I do know that whoever designs the New York Times paper decided to bury the story at the back of the front section. I do know that multiple media outlets rushed out with the story that the man was fleeing another crime and then buried the story after they made a offhanded correction and moved on. And I know something else as well. If it had been a Trump supporter, and this had been a parade for George Floyd or against Kyle Rittenhouse, we'd still be talking about it. I know that. I know that if the driver was white and the parade crowd was black, CNN and the New York Times would be giving it wall-to-wall coverage. I know this. I know this because they're still talking about the Charlottesville situation with the idiots and the tiki torches and the poor girl who was killed when someone ran her over. They're still talking about this. They would rather talk about that than this. They would rather talk about January 6th than this. They would rather talk about everything that potentially makes Trump voters look bad than talk about this story. Why do you think that is? Remember, when small business owners decided to protest the COVID lockdowns, the media, and I do mean the media, from the New York Times to CNN to MSNBC to ABC to the Washington Post, they were vilified by reporters and the editorial pages. They were caricatured by the reporters. They selectively spoke to the craziest ones they could get on record and avoided the sane ones. They vilified them for protesting lockdowns and their small businesses being hurt. And then when the George Floyd riots came, you almost had an obligation to be in the street and protest. And it was your civic duty. Who cares about COVID? I know this because when college football season started, there was mass hysteria about Southern stadiums being crowded with SEC football attendees, and we were all going to die because of COVID. And it did not happen. And now when the University of Michigan storms the field against the Ohio State, And Michigan has the highest COVID rate in the country. The media said nothing. The governor there is a Democrat. It's the narrative. And too many members of the media are too focused on the narrative. And if it doesn't fit the narrative, they ignore it. And people are more and more mindful of this. You're more likely in the past week to hear coverage in the News Corps about Kyle Rittenhouse than about Darrell Brooks. You're more likely to hear news coverage of the people getting thrown in jail for the Ahmaud Arbery case, and thank God for that, the justice and jury system work, than you are this. You're more likely to hear about January 6th than Donald Trump than you are this. And the reason is all because of the narrative. A radical whose public and social media statements were all about black power and hating white people just so happens to drive into a crowd at a parade, a crowd of white people, killing 6 of them, including a child. His social media posts are rambling, derogatory, and racist. He has a long rap sheet. He's been treated very lightly by a prison system and a judicial system where many of the DAs who were involved are people who have been light on crime for a while. And so the media moves as quickly from the story as possible. Remember, it's never really about, in the media bias world, it's never really per se about what they cover. It's what they don't cover, how quickly they move on from something inconvenient, and who they choose to interview in shaping the stories. And there will those, again, who say, well, you can't say the media because which outlets are you talking about? Fox News is dominant. Oh, you all know what I'm talking about. Even the people who tell me I'm being obtuse, you know exactly what I'm talking about. There is Fox News, there is talk radio, and then there is ABC, CBS, and NBC. More Americans still get their news from those 3 news networks, and they rapidly moved on from the story as quick as they could. And the ancillary news outlets of the mainstream media, from CNN to MSNBC to the New York Times to USA Today to the Washington Post, they've tried very hard to avoid the story because it upsets their narrative. And their narrative is that only white people do these sorts of things, and that it's a one-way street. It's white people abusing others. And to the extent that someone lashes out, well, you can't really blame him because he's been oppressed by whites for so long. If anything, give it a few more weeks and we will see that Darrell Brooks is a deeply troubled person who suffered at the hands of white patriarchy. And surely it'll become reasonable by then for members of the media. We all know this is likely to happen. And that's why so many people do not treat the media very seriously anymore.